Hello! In this CMMI Tech Talk three-part series, we are going to talk about an important appraisal role, the appraisal sponsor. Let's begin by looking specifically at the role the sponsor plays before an appraisal is conducted. The CMMI Appraisal Method Definition Document, MDD, defines an appraisal sponsor as the individual, internal or external to the organization being appraised, who requires the appraisal to be performed and who provides funding, the contract, or other resources to conduct the appraisal. The sponsor needs to occupy a position where they can ensure the appropriate participation of all the necessary participants and commit their organization and its resources to the improvement efforts and appraisal, including adhering to ISACA policy requirements. After an organization has decided to conduct an appraisal, one of the first issues facing the sponsor is the selection of an appraisal team leader. Sponsors can search the ISACA CMMI Partner Directory to find certified CMMI lead appraisers in their country or region and verify if they speak their language. Another important decision is determining which type of appraisal to conduct. An appraisal team leader can help discuss what option is best for the sponsor's organization and goals. If this is the organization's first appraisal, then the choices are limited to either an evaluation or a benchmark appraisal. Benchmark appraisals are the only type that allows achievement of a formal rating, for example, either capability or maturity levels. However, this may not be the right choice for a first appraisal. Evaluation appraisals do not give a formal rating, but they are very useful in finding out where the organization stands to begin with. The feedback also is very useful in focusing the organization's process improvement efforts. Evaluation appraisals can be tailored to be less of an impact on the organization while still getting valuable information for performance improvement prioritization, and can reduce the risk for achieving the target maturity or capability level from an eventual benchmark appraisal. Often, organizations will conduct a couple of evaluation appraisals before ever undergoing a benchmark appraisal, and with some organizations, the need for a formal rating never occurs. One of the things that helps in deciding the type of appraisal to use is identifying the organization's critical appraisal objectives. In other words, what does the sponsor want to achieve from the appraisal activities? Often, the place to start is to examine the organization's own business objectives. The sponsor shares their business and appraisal objectives with the appraisal team leader, as understanding what the organization is trying to achieve is important for the appraisal team in appraising how the CMMI can be best applied to the organization's context. The sponsor also needs to work with the appraisal team leader in determining the scope of the appraisal. There are two important aspects of this decision. First, which part of the organization is the focus of the appraisal, which is called the organizational unit or the OU in the ISACA CMMI Appraisal Method Definition Document or MDD. Unless the organization is very small, it is unlikely that the appraisal will cover the whole of the organization. Often, the organizational scope of an appraisal is a specific business unit, department, or set of related projects. Generally, they fit together either under common management or are related in terms of mission or business goals and the organizational construct. The selection of the organizational scope can also influence the other aspect of the scope, the model scope. The model scope determines which part of the CMMI model are in focus for the appraisal. For benchmark appraisals, the two most common targets are a maturity level for either CMMI development or services. For evaluation appraisals, a rating is not allowed, but you will still need to determine what practice group level each practice area should be explored. Of course, selecting which view to pick these practice areas from is also important. This choice is often determined by the type of work the organization does. The development view applies to organizations that develop products or components, whether hardware, systems of software, or some combination. In contrast, the services view is applicable for organizations that are focused on setting up and delivering services of any type. Although many people think automatically of IT-related services, the CMMI services view has been applied successfully to many different service providers, for example, medical services, banking, insurance, and training. Other aspects of applicable CMMI view should also be discussed with the appraisal team leader. For instance, does the organization rely on strong supplier performance for its own success? In this case, supplier agreement management may be needed. Likewise, are there safety or security aspects that affect how the work is done in the organization? There are CMMI practice areas relevant to these domains, and the appraisal team leader will need to determine whether they should feature in the appraisal model scope. In short, as a sponsor, you should fully brief the appraisal team leader on the full context of the work that is in focus for the appraisal. Having determined the basics of the appraisal team leader will need to scope and plan out the appraisal in detail. It is often a good idea to appoint an organizational unit coordinator, also known as an OU coordinator or OUC, for the appraisal team leader to liaise with throughout the process. Ultimately, both the sponsor and ATL have to agree on the final scope and plan. The OUC is usually involved with all stages of the appraisal process, from planning and preparation, phase 1, through to liaising with the team during the conduct appraisal phase 2. So picking a suitable OUC is very important. Someone who knows the organization well enough to guide the appraisal team leader. In addition, the OUC should be provided with the authority to ensure the appropriate involvement of all relevant groups in the planning, preparation, and conduct of the appraisal. Picking a good OUC can take a lot of work off the sponsor's shoulders and help to ensure that the appraisal process flows smoothly. As the appraisal planning progresses, the appraisal team leader will obtain a randomly generated sample, or RGS, to use in the appraisal. This is the selection of the work done in the organization that will be examined in the appraisal. This usually includes several projects or service teams and the organizational support functions such as quality assurance that interact with these teams. As the name implies, it is randomly generated, which helps the appraisal team explore an effective cross-section of the work done by the organization. It also helps to spread the load of the work in preparing and engaging in the appraisal. The appraisal team leader will need to review the RGS with the sponsor. In some cases, they may need to add elements to the sample to ensure appropriate coverage of the work that is actually done and include all the relevant groups. The sponsor may also suggest that a different project be substituted for a project selected by the random sample process. However, this substitution will need to be justified and may not necessarily receive approval. It is necessary that prior to the generation of the RGS, the original sample scope is thoroughly completed and the appraisal team leader is aware of any constraints, risks, and limitations of the involvement of any parts of that sample scope. Another area where the sponsor has some involvement with the planning and preparation of the appraisal is the selection of the appraisal team. The appraisal team leader is ultimately responsible for the appraisal. They have the final say on who will be appraisal team members or ATMs. CMMI appraisals are perhaps a little unusual in that participation of people from the organization on the appraisal team is allowed and to some extent even encouraged. Often, the internal ATMs are proposed by the sponsor, and the appraisal team leader is responsible for checking that they are eligible to be on the appraisal team. Candidate ATMs need to have received the necessary CMMI model training and fulfill the necessary experience requirements to be an ATM. Having some internal ATMs on the appraisal team can really help make the appraisal process efficient and ensure that appraisal findings are relevant to the organization. Internal ATMs stay with the organization once the appraisal is completed. The insights they gain from participating in the appraisal can be invaluable in focusing the improvement efforts after the appraisal has concluded. In every appraisal, as with any complicated project, there are always risks. The sponsor should review these risks throughout the appraisal process with the appraisal team leader. There is a special subset of risks that are important in appraisal teams. These are usually referred to as conflicts of interest. CMMI appraisals are focused on providing organizations with an objective insight into how the implementation of their processes compares with the best practice guidance provided by the model. Objectivity is crucial in attaining these insights, and so appraisal team leaders must critically look at where any challenges to that objectivity may arise. Appraisal team leaders themselves may be compromised and unable to remain objective if they have been involved with the process improvement program prior to the appraisal. Effectively, they might be seen as marking their own homework. The same applies to internal ATMs if they have had a significant involvement with implementing the processes that are examined in the appraisal. Appraisal participants in interview sessions may influence the objectivity of other participants. For instance, consider the situation of someone being interviewed with their boss in the same interview session. Might they be influenced in what they feel they can or cannot say? Not all conflicts of interest may prevent someone from being on an appraisal team or an appraisal participant. Conflicts of interest occur in many situations, but the important thing is to recognize and manage them. The worst thing that can happen is to pretend that conflicts of interest don't exist or downplay them because it could call into question the appraisal's viability. Other factors important in maintaining the objectivity of the appraisal process are confidentiality and non-attribution. For appraisal participants who are interviewed in the appraisal process, confidentiality simply means that nothing is reported back at the end of the appraisal that is attributable to any individual or group of people. In fact, confidentiality affects the whole appraisal team and their deliberations throughout the appraisal. So maintaining this confidential nature of the appraisal activities is important to ensuring that all relevant information is available to the appraisal team and that their discussions they have in the process are private and stay that way. All ATMs, the appraisal team leader, and sponsor sign a confidentiality agreement outlining that they all agreed to maintain this confidentiality and non-attribution during and after the appraisal. The final thing that the appraisal sponsor needs to do prior to the appraisal is to approve the appraisal plan by signing it into the CMMI appraisal system, or CAS. The appraisal team leader will often review the appraisal plan with the sponsor during the final readiness review. This provides a final check that the plan is in place and the preparations for the appraisal are sufficiently advanced to proceed with the appraisal. In signing the appraisal plan, along with the sponsor's roles and responsibilities, SRR form, the sponsor agrees to abide by the requirements and rules ISACA has established for CMMI appraisals. Thank you for joining us in this CMMI Tech Talk. To learn more about how the appraisal sponsor's role evolves throughout an appraisal, please check parts 2 and 3 of this series. You can find the links below. If you have any additional questions, please contact us at support.isaca.org.